In the desolate, frozen wilderness of the Arctic, where the sun barely graces the landscape and the cold is unrelenting, a scientific research team makes an extraordinary discovery. Their expedition, intended for routine climate studies, turns into a historic moment when they uncover something buried deep beneath layers of ice, something that should not exist. It is a human body, encased in an ancient glacier. The preservation is astonishing. The figure appears to be in near-perfect condition, his skin still intact, his posture frozen in time. The researchers, initially suspecting they have uncovered the remains of a relatively recent explorer, soon realize that they are looking at something far older. Upon examination, carbon dating confirms the unthinkable truth. This man is at least 40,000 years old, dating back to the Paleolithic era, a time when early humans shared the planet with Neanderthals. He is not a modern man lost in the Arctic. He is a true relic of prehistory. The implications of this discovery are staggering. A find of this magnitude could rewrite everything scientists thought they knew about early human survival in extreme conditions. The research team carefully extracts the frozen body and transports it to their base, where a highly advanced cryogenic laboratory has been set up to analyze him in detail. But something happens that no one could have predicted. As the scientists begin the delicate process of thawing his body for further study, something unexpected occurs. There is a flicker of activity, a faint, sluggish pulse. His body is not dead. He is alive. Panic and excitement ripple through the team as they realize the impossible truth. This prehistoric man has somehow survived tens of thousands of years in suspended animation, frozen in time, but not biologically dead. His cells, his tissues, his organs, everything has been preserved by the ice, kept in a state that allowed for the possibility of revival. The scientists work frantically to stabilize him. Medical equipment is attached, monitoring his heart rate, brain activity, and respiration. It is slow and weak at first, but soon he begins to breathe steadily. His vitals normalize, and then, in a moment that should never have been possible, his eyes open. What follows is pure chaos. The moment he gains awareness, he is immediately overwhelmed by his surroundings. His breathing turns erratic. His body thrashes violently as he tries to make sense of the alien world around him. The sterile metallic laboratory, the beeping machines, the bright artificial lights. Nothing is familiar. He has awakened not in his own world, but in a nightmare of incomprehensible sights and sounds. His instincts kick in. He tries to escape. The researchers struggle to contain him, unsure of how to approach someone whose last memory was of a world that no longer exists. Everything about him, his reactions, his movements, his desperate need to flee, shows that he does not recognize anything. He does not understand what has happened to him or where he is. It takes hours before he calms down, exhausted from the struggle. But the fear remains. His body is in the present, but his mind is still in the past. With the initial panic subsiding, the real challenge begins. How do you communicate with a man whose civilization predates written language? How do you explain to someone frozen for 40,000 years that they have awakened in the future, in a world where everything they knew has vanished? Leading this effort is Dr. Stanley Shepard, an anthropologist who sees the Iceman not as a mere subject of study, but as a person trapped in an unfathomable situation. While the other scientists focus on analyzing his biological makeup, Shepard is determined to understand him as a man, his emotions, his memories, his past. The process is slow and frustrating. The Iceman does not speak in any recognizable language. His gestures, his expressions, his reactions are all rooted in a world no one else understands. But progress is made. He begins to mimic certain behaviors, reacting with clear emotion to familiar stimuli. He is given food, and without hesitation, he tears into it with a hunger that speaks of a life where every meal was hard-earned. When shown fire, he reacts not with fear, but with deep recognition. He knows fire. He remembers it. Slowly, Shepard pieces together the first fragments of understanding. The Iceman is not just an ordinary hunter. He was someone important in his time. A leader, a shaman, a protector of his people. He did not just survive in his world. He had a purpose. And now, that world is gone. As days pass, the research team becomes divided over how to proceed. On one side, there are those who see the Iceman as a scientific miracle, a once-in-history opportunity to unlock secrets of human evolution, test his DNA, understand ancient survival techniques. To them, he is a specimen first, a person second. On the other side, Shepard and a few others believe he is a man first. They argue that he deserves dignity, understanding, and respect. He is not a test subject. He is a human being who has been displaced from his world. Tensions rise. Government officials and corporate interests loom over the project, eager to take control. To them, ethics do not matter. Only knowledge and power do. If they can study him further, break down his genetic structure, analyze his adaptability, they could make groundbreaking advancements in science, medicine, and military survival tactics. Shepard refuses to let that happen. But he is running out of time. The Iceman, growing increasingly restless, begins to understand the danger he is in. He may not comprehend this new world, but he recognizes captivity. He knows what it means to be hunted, and deep inside him, an instinct awakens. He must escape. As Shepard spends more time with him, he realizes something profound. The Iceman is remembering, not just simple actions. He is recalling something deeper, something sacred. In moments of solitude, he hums to himself, performing rituals, making symbols with his hands. He is searching for something, a vision, a memory, a lost purpose. Then, one day, the Iceman stares out into the Arctic wilderness through the facility's glass windows. His breathing changes. He recognizes something. The cold, the ice, the land beyond. And in that moment, Shepard understands. The Iceman does not belong here. His world is gone, but the land is still here. And if he cannot return to his past, then he will return to the only thing that remains of it, the ice. He is ready to leave, but the facility will never let him go. Shepard knows what he must do. He must help him escape. The Iceman has spent days inside the research facility, surrounded by sterile walls, artificial light, and the cold observation of men who see him as little more than a scientific anomaly. His body has survived the millennia, but his mind is struggling to process the unrecognizable world around him. Nothing makes sense to him. The metal surfaces of the lab reflect images he cannot comprehend. The voices around him carry no meaning, no familiar rhythm. The food he is given is strange but satisfying. The water is pure but lifeless. Everything here is unnatural. But through the confusion, fragments of memory begin to emerge. The smell of burning wood, the feeling of furs wrapped around his skin, the rhythmic chants of his people as they gathered around a fire, the sound of the wind whistling over endless ice, a song he had once known as home. This place is not home. He does not belong here. He is alone, a relic of a lost time, revived into a future that has no place for him. The realization brings something worse than fear, a deep and inescapable sorrow. And yet, despite his isolation, there is one man who sees him not as a specimen, but as a person. Dr. Stanley Shepard has spent more time with the Iceman than anyone else in the facility. Unlike the others, he does not see him as a subject to be examined, but as a man to be understood. Through slow and careful observation, Shepard has begun to recognize patterns in the Iceman's behavior. His responses are not random. His gestures are filled with meaning. Though language is a barrier that cannot be crossed, there is a deeper form of communication taking shape. The Iceman is trying to express himself. When given fire, he does not flinch. Instead, he stares into the flames with reverence, recalling something sacred. He begins to chant softly, his voice low, rhythmic, a ritual, an offering, a prayer. When left alone, he draws symbols in the dust, patterns that repeat with precision and intent. They are not random scratches. They are memories, echoes of stories once told under ancient skies. Shepard watches and listens, feeling an overwhelming sense of respect. The Iceman is not just a hunter. He was a leader, a shaman, a guide among his people. He was more than a survivor. He carried the weight of knowledge, tradition, and the spiritual connection of his tribe. And now his tribe is gone. The world he belonged to exists only in his mind. The pain of this realization is evident in his every movement, his every moment of silence. And Shepard understands. The Iceman cannot stay here. While Shepard tries to understand the Iceman as a human being, the rest of the research team sees only a groundbreaking opportunity for scientific discovery. Pressure from the government and corporate sponsors begins to mount. They want results, and they want them now. The Iceman is too valuable to be left to simple observation. They want testing, data collection, invasive analysis. If they can understand how he survived for 40,000 years, they could unlock medical breakthroughs, biological secrets, even military applications. To them, he is not a person. He is a genetic marvel to be studied and exploited. Shepard protests. He argues that the Iceman is not just a frozen caveman. He is a thinking, feeling individual who deserves to live, not be dissected. But his words fall on deaf ears. The higher-ups authorize a full medical examination, including genetic extraction, neurological mapping, and physical probing. The Iceman will not survive what they plan to do, and Shepard knows it. He has no choice. If the Iceman is to have a chance at freedom, Shepard must help him escape. Late at night, while the facility is quiet, Shepard makes his move. He carefully unlocks the doors to the Iceman's chamber, motioning for him to follow. The Iceman hesitates at first, his instincts still unsure whether to trust this strange man from the future. But then he sees the open doorway leading out into the Arctic cold. He knows what this means. With swift, silent steps, he follows Shepard through the facility, evading security patrols and cameras. Every second is a risk. If they are caught, there will be no second chance. At last, they reach the outer doors, the final barrier between captivity and the wilderness beyond. Shepard opens it. The Arctic wind rushes in, biting and unforgiving, but to the Iceman, it is a welcome embrace. This is the air he was meant to breathe. Without hesitation, he steps out into the snow, and then the alarms sound. The facility has discovered their escape. Guards rush into action, orders are shouted, and the chase begins. Shepard turns to warn him, but the Iceman is already running. He does not run aimlessly. He knows where he is going. The guards fire warning shots, their voices carrying across the icy landscape. But the Iceman does not stop. His legs move with the speed of a man who has run across frozen tundras his entire life. Shepard watches in awe and fear as the Iceman sprints toward the horizon, where the ice stretches endlessly, untouched by time. And then, he reaches the edge of a deep, dark crevasse. The guards close in, their weapons raised. There is no escape left, but the Iceman knows this is the end of his journey. He turns back one last time, meeting Shepard's gaze. There is no fear in his eyes, only understanding, acceptance, and something almost like gratitude. And then, without hesitation, he jumps. He vanishes into the darkness, swallowed once more by the ice that had preserved him for so long. And just like that, he is gone. The Iceman's disappearance into the frozen abyss marks the end of a story that never should have existed. He was never meant to wake in this world, never meant to see the future that had forgotten him. And yet, by some miracle, by some cosmic accident or divine intervention, he was pulled from the past, given a brief glimpse into what lay ahead, only to realize that the future had no place for him. He was not a visitor to this world. He was a survivor of another time, a relic of an age when man still lived in harmony with nature, when survival was dictated by instinct, skill, and the will of the land itself. He had walked among mammoths, hunted with his tribe, watched the stars as his ancestors had done for thousands of years. But when he awoke, those stars had changed. The land was still frozen, but the world was different. He had become an artifact, an experiment, a curiosity to be studied, not a person to be understood. But he was a person, and in the end, he reclaimed his destiny. The scientists and government officials would have kept him locked away, prodded and tested him until he was no longer a man, but a mere collection of data points and biological specimens. They would have erased his humanity in their pursuit of knowledge. But knowledge without understanding is hollow. Knowledge without respect is meaningless. Shepard knew this. He had felt at the moment he looked into the Iceman's eyes, that spark of intelligence, of pain, of longing. He was not a prehistoric brute. He was not a savage. He was a man displaced from time, seeking the only thing he had ever known, his freedom. And so, when the opportunity arose, he took it. His escape was not just a desperate attempt at survival. It was his final act of defiance, his last statement to the world that had stolen him from his time. He did not belong in a cage. He did not belong under microscopes. He belonged in the vast, open wilderness, beneath the endless sky, where the wind carried the voices of his ancestors. When he stood at the edge of the icy crevasse, he did not hesitate. There was no fear in his eyes, no regret. Only the certainty that this was the only way home. And so he leapt, not into death, but into eternity. In the days that followed, the research facility fell into silence. The Iceman was gone, and with him, the greatest discovery of the modern age had vanished into the frozen depths of the Arctic. The official reports told a different story. The government could not admit what had happened. They could not let the world know that they had lost him. So they fabricated the truth, claiming that the Iceman had perished during testing, that his body had suffered an irreversible collapse due to prolonged exposure and thawing complications. They buried the project, sealing away the data, making sure no one would ask questions. But Shepard knew the truth. He knew that somewhere, beneath the Iceman rested once more, not as a captive, but as a free man. Perhaps in time, the ice would shift again. Perhaps, millennia from now, another team of scientists would find his body once more, frozen in perfect stillness, waiting for another chance to awaken. Or perhaps, this time, he would finally rest forever. The question would linger in Shepard's mind for the rest of his life. Was the Iceman truly meant to return to the past, or had he been given a glimpse of the future for a reason? Was he a messenger, a warning, a reminder that no matter how far humanity advanced, it could never escape its origins? Shepard would never have an answer, but he knew one thing for certain. The Iceman was not just an ancient human. He was not just a relic. He was a survivor. And in the end, he did not belong to history nor to science. He belonged to the ice. The story of the Iceman is not just a tale of science and discovery. It is a story about what it means to be human. It is about the arrogance of modern civilization, the belief that all knowledge is meant to be acquired, all mysteries meant to be solved, all beings meant to be studied and categorized. But some things are beyond understanding. Some things are meant to remain untouched, wild, and free. The Iceman was a man who lived by the laws of nature, who saw the world not through the lens of technology or industry, but through the raw and unfiltered experience of existence itself. He did not fear the cold. He did not fear the unknown. He feared losing himself, and that was the one thing he would never allow. Perhaps his greatest lesson to the world was this: not everything belongs in the hands of science. Not everything is meant to be understood. Some things are sacred. Some things are meant to remain wild. And so, as the wind howled over the Arctic once more, covering the traces of his final journey, the world moved on, unaware that for a brief moment in time, history had awakened, lived, and returned to its rightful place. The ice had given him back, and the ice had taken him home.